One of the things that I love is that two films idea of your life. And there's like two stories you can tell. One that is safe and full of regret, and one that is risky and full of pride and joy.
Hello everybody and welcome to our front room. So this is a bit of a novel experience. Aha, I've got you all in gallery view now. You really are all in my front room. And that's both exciting and curious. I love that there's folks from across the world. It's a good one, isn't it, for a talk about solitude, but we're connected somehow. So I'm going to talk for 20 minutes. I am Sarah, in case any of you don't know who I am and we're expecting it to be someone else introing. I'm going to talk for 20 minutes and then there's going to be 10 minutes or so of questions, which the Do team will field over the chat box. So pop any questions into the chat box at the bottom there. So I know we've got quite a nice crowd of Rent-A-Crowd folks that I know and love, and who ordinarily at this time I would hope to be seeing, meeting up with, hugging, holding, etc. And I appreciate that there's perhaps quite a few of you as well who know nothing about me and just are here for whatever reason tonight. So talking about what 500 days of being alone on the ocean has taught me about solitude is an interesting concept just in the numbers, because I haven't actually spent 500 days alone on the ocean. The number's a little bit rounded somewhat, but after spending what I thought was 153 days alone on the Pacific in 2013, I actually arrived on land to find out that I'd only been at sea for 150 days. So who knows? It may be feeling like you've spent 365 days in lockdown already, but I hope it doesn't feel that way. So my sort of journey into solo adventuring, in a big way at least, started, well, I mean, I never intended it to happen that way. It feels like it kind of came about by other means almost. I went to sea in 2009. Excuse me, I went to sea in 2009 to row across the Indian Ocean, solo from Australia to Mauritius. It's a journey I thought I would have done with a team because, well, when you go by yourself, who do you talk to? That kind of question. But when my dad died very suddenly, quite early on in that planning process, I just knew I needed to go solo. And people said, how do you know that you're going to cope, Sarah? And I just had a sense that that was a journey that meant so much to me in terms of remembering my dad. I couldn't make it with anyone who didn't know my dad. So I set off not quite knowing how solitude would work for me. And I was 23 at the time, and I look at it as one of the most mind-opening sort of periods of my life. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest things about solitude, one of the biggest gifts and beauties of solitude is the openness and the spaciousness. I recognized during that journey that I was more aware about what was going on around me. My senses were more open. But I think it's interesting how solitude is full of contrast as well. And I think as I sort of sum up what solitude's shown me, given me, it is one of contrasts. And just in that way of saying there's openness and awareness and a sort of like a juiciness, a creativeness about solitude on the one hand, it can also be perhaps huge and intimidating, frightening or noisy and close on the other hand. There's a lovely poem which is a favourite by E. Cummings. It's Maggie and Millie and Molly and May go down to the sea to play one day, and it describes what each finds at the sea. And May came home with a smooth round stone, as small as the world and as large as alone. And that sums up for me that kind of lovely spaciousness, like you can just be Winnie the Pooh and wander along and stuff wanders in and out, but equally it can feel perhaps constricting or frightening. And I think within that, there's something about the need for connection. Certainly that's what I've found through my periods of solitude, which, by the way, I should put it in context, went on from that 124-day journey across the Indian Ocean when I was 23. I had my 24th birthday out there with the albatrosses. I then went from that to a round the world journey where I rode and I cycled and I kayaked most of the way around the Northern Hemisphere. So big periods of solitude, coming in and out of that on land as I met other people. But then during the Pacific and the Atlantic row stages, they were big, long stretches, like 150, not 153 days at a time on the Pacific, and something not too dissimilar on the Atlantic as well. And something that was really important at sustaining me in those times, always, and I now realize just always in life, is that kind of connection, the need for connection and community, both with myself, perhaps through breath and awareness and sort of presence. And I think in that state, you're then more open to what's going on around you, but also connection with the world around me, other beings, the universe, my boat, and importantly, people that I love, people back home as well, who really were kind of on the boat with me as well. Another E. Cummings poem that I love, I carry your heart with me, I carry it in my heart. That idea that there is connection, that even in separateness, we're joined by these like threads of love and connection. So people often find it, a bit bizarre when I said I talk to myself lots on the ocean, or to my boat, or to my fruit friends if I was lucky enough to have fruit. Here's the latest, Melanie. And the beings that were around that visited my boat as well. So there were pilot fish, black and white striped fish, who followed my boat for days and weeks and months at a time. The biggest on the Indian Ocean, I called him Monsieur Tweedle-le-Grand, after Tweedledum and Tweedledee, you know, out of Alice in Wonderland, all stripy. And I'd be sad if I didn't see them of a day, or be like, where's the one with the pink nose? He's not here, what's going on? So those connections with animals were important. And I think, well, not I just think, I feel one of my most profound connections with another being ever was on the Atlantic Ocean, just north of the Azores, really rich in wildlife, super hot day, weather's changing. I was inside the cabin of my little boat, and on a little rowing boat, there's not a lot of space. So the little cabin's just like being under the kitchen table. And I was in there doing some reading, and I could hear a sound that I didn't recognize. There was hissing and cracking and sort of, but what is this sound? This is weird. And I was looking through the boat to see if I could find what the sound was inside my cabin. And about 10 minutes later, it's still going on. I couldn't see what it was. So I stepped outside through the little hatch, and there, just a few meters away from me, was a herd of sperm whales. 4 sperm whales. 2 of them were as long as the boat, so 7 meters, 20 something feet. And the 2 others, which I guess were the mums of these 2 calves, were about 14 meters long. Just incredible to be eyeballing each other. They were logging on the surface, so lying like this, rolling over and opening their jaws. I could see their teeth. I could see their eyes sort of looking back at me. I could see where they'd been scratched by squid when they'd been scrapping way beneath the surface of the ocean. It was profound. And I think if I didn't have those connections with animals, if I hadn't seen any other animals, like if I'd been way in the interior of Antarctica, I feel that I'd have had a really different experience of that solitude, because for me, that sort of connections with other beings is really, really important. And I mentioned the connection with folks back at home too. So that could be through the power of my Iridium satellite phone. I'd call people. I'd call my mum when I needed to cry. I'd call my project manager, Sarah, when we needed to talk stuff. And it was important to hear another voice on the end of the phone. Or through the massive storm, the massive tropical storm that I went through on the Pacific Ocean, I held on to little talisman that people had given me, like a photo or a little rock from my mum. And that was really important to make me feel like I wasn't totally alone, because being alone in solitude like that can be, I nearly used a swear word then, but there might be youngsters here, so I won't, can be really flippin' scary. And there were times when I was absolutely terrified. And when people ask about, well, how did you get through that? On the one hand, it was about trying to take moments at a time. There's a lovely poem by Lem Sissay, which I think sums it up perfectly when he says, "How do you do it?" asked Night. "How do you wake up and shine?" "I keep it simple," said Light, "just one day at a time." But I recognized that beyond that, often the things I came back to were either looking at a photo of someone from home, or really bringing them to mind, or listening to something like Kirsty Young, Desert Island Discs. Anyone not in the UK, look that up somewhere, because she's got the most beautiful lilting Scottish voice. I went through a lot of storms with Kirsty Young in the background. I also found it really useful and calming and soothing to get my video camera out, turn it round on myself and look at the face talking back at me, even though it was my own face listening. There was a sense of being heard and being witnessed, which was important. And I think similarly to that, I love poems. I've already given a couple of little poetry quotes whilst talking, but I found it really reassuring and hopeful somehow to recite poems that I'd learned, because then I guess I was hearing a voice. There was a familiar sort of rhythm and pattern and repetition, and that was soothing to help me get through some of those scary moments. And on a similar level, there was something about being the parts of a team that I couldn't access through those people at home, perhaps. And by that, I mean being to myself the parts of a team that I needed right at that moment. So maybe some of you are familiar with Professor Steve Peters' work of the chimp model, the chimp paradox, which lots of heads nodding at me. So essentially he splits the brain up into three parts. You've got you, the human that can do logical, rational thought. You've got the chimp and the computer. The computer is the memory machine, and the chimp is the sort of more primitive part of ourselves that looks out for danger and wants to keep you safe. And somebody gave me a little knitted chimp model, a little knitted chimp finger puppet, that's the word, to take on one of my ocean rows. And I found it so useful to get my little chimpy out and talk to Chimpy, because obviously I was the one that was actually scared. But I'd take the human role and say, "Chimpy, I know you're really scared right now, but I'm doing everything I can to look after you." And so in that way, I suppose I was bringing around me the community that I so needed. I think, and I might really be misquoting this, but it's something that's in my head. Someone told me that Nietzsche had written, "You can achieve anything in isolation except sanity." And I think that just sort of shows that we need people. We're social mammals who really need each other. And I suppose on that front, just the word isolation is an interesting one, isn't it? Because isolation to me does evoke feelings of real separateness and detachment and sort of unsafety somehow. Whereas solitude, there's a certain romanticism about it that's really quite kind of beautiful and full of those creative, daydreamy, hopeful, spacious awareness things that I sort of preface the start with. So I've talked a little bit about the scariness and toughness that I found out on the ocean in those periods of months at a time with just me and my boats and the whales and folks at home and around me and so on. And I think probably the biggest important lesson that I learned both through that and in a subsequent period of something that did feel more like isolation and solitude is about how being tough is actually about being soft with yourself. So when I came back from the Pacific in 2012, I'd just been rescued from my boat Gulliver after a tropical storm had damaged him such that I couldn't carry on. The PTSD and fallout was very messy and difficult. And my way of being at the time was, I've just got to carry on and pretend everything's okay, which really didn't work for very long. I mean, I wasn't fooling anyone. But in that sort of mental health crash and subsequent crashes, which felt so lonely and isolating, I realized that actually reaching out and asking for help was the most important thing. And that I needed to tap into more of those ways of being that I'd found on the ocean when I didn't have those people directly around me to help and soothe and hug and hold and all of those things, was actually to be kind and soft to myself as much as I could whenever I could. And that was the sort of the biggest learning about kind of being tough and getting through those times, was about being soft. Actually, it's like grass, you know, if you step on a brittle twig that is so intent on trying to be upright like that, it'll break. But if you can be soft and flexible like the grass, that's when it's stood on, it can pop back up, then it will endure. And I suppose perhaps the most important part of all of that is being able to be with all of those contrasts and highs and lows of different feelings and emotions and states, and express them all, like welcome them all. They're all rich and valid and varied. I think of it like the rug that you can't see but I'm stood on, but actually reflects the map behind me, right? It's this big whole that's full of different shapes and parts and colors, and that is how I experienced the solitude. And that to kind of get the most from it and survive through it, you've got to let it all kind of pass through you and be a part of you, even the stuff that feels difficult, and express it out into the world and have it listened to and held somehow. So I suppose they're the things that some of the things I've learned about solitude from a few hundred days. I think it's like 460 something in total, 70 something maybe, that I've spent alone in little boats out on the ocean amongst all the ups and downs and colors and things. That is about contrast. There's great potency and creativity, sort of openness and awareness. That it's absolutely crucial that there's connection and community, and we will as humans seek that in whatever way we can with ourselves, the world and other beings. That it can be really scary and flipping tough, but that in through sort of being soft and expressing and asking for help, then we can endure. So that is all for me for the chat side of it. I can see there's already some questions in the chat box, and magically, through the power of tech, they're all on my phone. So I will answer these now. From Mike Coulter, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? That's a joke, it's not. His question is actually, did I have a formal daily meditation practice on the trip? I didn't have a formal daily meditation, but it's interesting. I only really came to formal meditation and the ideas around it after my journeys. I actually think I was already doing it before I knew it was a thing to do actively. And for me, the sort of repetitive rhythm of rowing or cycling and so on is like a meditation and puts me into a state, often, not always, where that is possible. From Bingo, did you miss people and things a bit less than you thought you might? I don't know. In my first journey, I don't know how much I thought I might miss things, which, well, actually, I knew that I wouldn't miss things, but I don't know that I thought too much about how much I would miss people. I was really task focused on that. And it was really interesting to me how important community around me became, and how important the letters and the sort of talisman and the contact with home really did become. So I only had limited potential to call home on that very first journey. And I called my mum once a week. and perhaps one other call. So I really held on to those calls with home and the letters and birthday presents that people had sort of sent out for birthdays. And I think it was through my later journeys that I came to realize that solitude wasn't what I wanted in my life at that time anymore. So partway through that round the world journey, the London to London journey, I met my wife, my now wife, Lucy, and that made everything feel really different. To be alone on the ocean and for Lucy to be a version of alone at home, and for us not to be together. And that was a real sort of shift in where I wanted to be and didn't want to be as well. From Adrienne, what was the best moment back on dry land? And what was your worst moment on return? The best moment in all of those journeys in coming back to land has always been the feeling of safety and of knowing that there were other people who could look after me at that point, that I could rest, I could stand down a bit. And the paradox to that is that certainly after the Indian Ocean, my first solo experience, coming back was really challenging too, for the fact that there were other people around who wanted to do things to help me. Because for 4 months I'd been alone and focused, and I knew what I had to do, and I knew where everything was on my boat. And so to have other people coming into my space and doing some of those things was really discombobulating. It took quite a while to settle back into something that felt a little more stable somehow. What was the worst moment, I suppose, was a feeling of separation from my boat and a sort of a nostalgia, a homesickness for the ocean each time, for some of those wildlife moments and spectacles of sunrise and sunset and all of those things. From the Hajimis, hello Hajimis, we were lucky enough to see your film Home at the Banff Film Festival, which was fascinating. Thank you for the kind words. Your original journey around the world was for closure. Have you got any big plans in the pipeline for enjoyment? I don't have any current big plans for a sort of a physical journey in the way that I've journeyed previously. Lucy and I now, we have 3 donkeys, so we're not in a place to go marching off around the world with the donkeys. At the moment, we're both sort of working and training in different ways. So my adventures now are much sort of closer to home, and there's nephews and nieces and friends having kids sort of popping up all over the place. So I actually want to be in one place, certainly in one part of me, to grow roots and be a part of a physical community. And that's not to say that there's another part that is off dreaming in my head somewhere, being somewhere else. But there's plenty of adventures in a very local sort of area as well. From Sean Washman, how did you get your family to understand your need for it once you discovered the value for it? I'm not sure I ever gave my family much of a choice about that, or any sense of agency in not that would sort of stop me from going. And I really thank my family for being really supportive of that. And when I got together with Lucy and her family becoming really supportive of that too. So yeah, I thank my family and team and everyone who helped that. From Mr. Sedders, do you think we need extreme situations like the pandemic or being alone in the middle of the ocean to force us to consider ourselves and what is most important to us in our lives? I don't know whether it's a need, but certainly for me, I find big experiences will often shift my sort of, allow me to clarify my perspectives and values. And my sense from talking to people now and reading social media and the news and things, is that for a lot of us that is happening. There are positive parts of the situation right now that are people do seem to want to carry forward, and that's a good thing. I think as humans we need to make meaning from stuff. We just do it all the time. We need it to feel safe and secure in the world, I suppose, and anything that helps us mold that and change that, I feel is a positive thing. So from Sarah Hewitt, did you find yourself needing solitude when you got back from your trips, or did you just want to be around people? It was quite a transition each time, from coming out of solitude to being around people, something that I often found quite difficult and overwhelming. And it was really useful once I'd recognized that was a pattern, that I then could tell the people around me, this is what's going on. It's not because I'm being awkward or difficult or ungrateful. It's just what my body is doing as it kind of comes from one world into another. So again, it was a bit of a paradox. I was grateful to be around people and glad that they were there and could help me, but I still needed to retreat and go and curl up as though in the cabin of my boat, and so on at times. From Ruby, age 8, do I still have my boat? I don't have any of my rowing boats anymore. Dippers is somewhere in America. That was the Indian Ocean boat, and I don't even know who has Dippers anymore. Gulliver is somewhere in the Philippines. Happy Socks is awaiting a row with Leah Ditton from California out to Hawaii. That's the wrong way around across the Pacific. She's going from Japan to North America. I still have my kayaks, which were part of that journey. So I've got Chrissy and Nelson. From Alice, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? Well, boringly, these days I have to be dairy-free. So the tub of dairy-free ice cream that I've got in the cupboard at the moment, in the freezer, is caramel and chocolate. And that's pretty cool. From Nick Russell, oh, good read, Nick Russell. I'm reading the books of Tristan Gooley, The Natural Navigator. Did all your time in nature unlock any sixth sense in nature? For example, sensing danger, direction, or weather. I don't know if it was a sort of a sixth sense or anything very specific, but in the way that I alluded to at the start, it definitely opened me in my awareness to what was going on around me. And certainly on the rowing boats out in the ocean, I became really in tune to the sounds of the boat. Because even on a really quite a still, calm day, there would be a sound, something would be bobbing or tapping, and I could hear that. So I would often wake up if I couldn't hear the noise, like if everything had totally gone quiet overnight, then I'd wake up kind of thinking, what's gone wrong? There's a change, something's happened. And the last question from Zoe Belshaw, how do we hold on to the amazing memories from these huge trips? Oh, golly, I think for me, they are just in me. They're a part of me. They're coded. I can close my eyes and I can get back to that moment of seeing the sperm whales on the Pacific. I think if we can sort of literally close eyes and associate back into some of those times and places where we've been and call in all the different senses, then somehow they're stored, and they're stored richly to sort of carry forward. So that's my thought on that. So thank you everybody for joining tonight. I'm just going to have a quick scroll through the different screens, so I make sure that I've looked at everybody, because I spent all that time looking at everyone on page number 1 of my screen. So wave to page number 1, page number 2. Hi everybody. Oh, nice world map up there, Jennifer Lee and co. Hello, hello, hello. Ah, this is so happy making seeing all of you. I'm so glad you joined. Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed. So that's everything from me for now. yeah, wipe your shoes on the way out. Don't. It's the way out. Go and get yourself a gin and tonic. Great stuff. Thank you all for coming.